We're on item number 3, request for interpretation of the temporary events ordinance. We've heard from planning staff and agriculture commissioner staff, and now we're going to go to the public, starting with the requester of this hearing, who has essentially the same standing as an applicant or an appellant, and Kim Pasciuto is going to make the presentation for the Ag Tourism Coalition. Ms. Pasciuto, how much time do you need?
I think I can keep it to 10 minutes.
That would be terrific. Can we set the clock for 10 minutes?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kim Pasciuto, Ag Tourism Coalition. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to address you today. There's a great deal of interest in expanding the uses allowed on ag and rural land, and the ag tourism proposals will provide you with an opportunity to consider a comprehensive approach for the future. But that is not our work today. Today you're asked to interpret the policies and ordinances that currently exist. At issue is whether an ag policy can be amended by simply interpreting or ignoring ordinances and policies to such an extent that they become meaningless, or whether the public process must be followed to make such a significant change. The Planning Department decisions in the application before you and in 2 other recent applications, Dancing Horse and Dancing Deer, reinterpret the requirements of Ag Policy 6 to such an extent as to constitute a rewriting of Ag Goals and Ag Policy 6. The decisions require you to ignore or twist various land use ordinances, including the Temporary Events Ordinance, accessory use provisions, the Home Occupations Code, and Ag Exempt Structure provisions to allow accessory uses on ag land that are far beyond what the current ordinances envisioned. There are major disagreements between the Planning Department and the Ag Department on the interpretation of Ag Policy 6. The Planning Department interpretation inches us away from the intent of our ag goals and policies in many ways, big and small, but they all relate to 2 main areas, temporary events and Ag Policy 6. We ask you to clarify how applications for accessory uses in rural areas should be determined from this point in time until such time as the policies are formally changed. So what are the issues? First is, what was the intent of the Temporary Events Ordinance? The ordinance was written at a time when tourism consisted of going to the beach, and the wine industry was a minor part of our local economy. People were more concerned about Woodstock than weddings. The idea was to permit limited one-time events with a discretionary use permit, minor use permit, not to create large year-round event uses in ag and rural areas. Examples of the events envisioned in the ordinance support this interpretation. A single art show that occurs once a year is different than an art show that occurs every other weekend, which is more like an art gallery or a museum. Similarly, a rodeo that occurs every other weekend is an equestrian center. A religious revival that occurs every other weekend is a church. A tent camp that occurs frequently is a campground, and concerts and festivals that occur every other weekend are public event facilities. We have different rules to govern each of those situations, but they most certainly are not temporary events. While that language says including but not limited to, it is not an invitation to disregard the intent of ag goals and policies. The ordinance says an event, and I underscore an event, may occur for up to 12 consecutive days or 4 weekends, successive weekends. Substitute any kind of event you like, a rodeo, an art show, any event. The ordinance says that the period of time for that event may be extended, but it does not say that you can use the language to multiply the number of events. 4 successive weekends does not mean 4 different events with the ability to expand to, say, 20 or more per year. That would be a permanent, ongoing public assembly and entertainment use, not a temporary event. There are rules that govern the conduct of permanent and ongoing businesses in residential areas, and that's called the Home Occupations Code. The Home Occupation Code recognizes the burdens of commercial uses in ag and rural areas, which are, after all, also residential. The ordinance limits the kind of businesses allowed and the burdens on the neighborhoods to 10 trips per day, no employees, and all off-street parking. In ag areas, the Temporary Events Ordinance was intended for a seasonal pumpkin festival, same farm, same pumpkin patch and haunted house, 4 weekends with the ability to expand to 5 if the crop warranted it. The prohibition on grading and construction is also strong evidence of the original intent that the event contemplated by the ordinance is a single and fleeting event. This interpretation of the Temporary Events Ordinance is also consistent with the historical application and later adoption of the Winery Special Events Ordinance, which would not have been necessary if planning's assertions were true. In fact, the wine industry made their case they needed a different ordinance because getting them up for each event was too burdensome and expensive. Applicants and their consultants don't understand the ordinance to allow for multiple events. This is evidenced by the fact that so few permits have been issued. Planning cites 5 examples in the last 25 years. The Madonna Expo Center permit was rather convoluted settlement of enforcement issues. With 60 events of 12 days each per year can hardly be called temporary. Hutchins abandoned the original permit and later applied for a winery permit, which was denied. The special events portion was denied. The last 3 are all very recent, late 2008 or 2009, and mostly contested applications precisely because planning's interpretation is new. Planning neglected to mention one application, Edwards, that was denied after strong neighborhood opposition. If the ordinance had been understood to allow multiple events, I'm sure the people here today to testify on behalf of weddings venues would have applied, but they haven't. The absence of permits, 3 in 25 years and all in the last 12 months, is evidence of a historical interpretation that the temporary events ordinance does not authorize multiple events. Even senior planning staff understood it that way and explained it that way to the Ag Tourism Coalition repeatedly, the Ag Tourism Working Group repeatedly in 2006 and 2007. Prompted by today's increase in interest in tourism, staff is working on revisions, and we hope they will expand event uses in the future, but to reinterpret the ordinance to achieve the desired result without public hearing is inappropriate, and we ask you to reject it. The evaluation of the proposal for a temporary event requires several steps, each of which require interpretation, and those interpretations can either support or undermine ag goals or policies. The recent interpretations undermine the policies, and I'm going to list a few of them for you, but in the interest of time, I hope you'll ask me more. The Planning Department allowed conversion of ag-exempt structures as long as there's no increase in footprint, in spite of the fact that 2206-040 precludes their use by the public. The Planning Department allows grading as long as no permit is required, rather than using the simple definition in Article 8. The Planning Department reinterpreted Ag Policy 6 to allow visitor serving uses based on a future intent to engage in agriculture. They rejected the Ag Department's measure of a primary ag use and the Ag Department's finding that an accessory use didn't meet the test of secondary and incidental, and they've substituted a finding that as long as it's not harmful to ag, it's secondary and incidental. For the first time, they're suggesting that Ag Policy 6 doesn't apply to temporary events at all. Where 2 interpretations are possible, we ask you to use the one that carries out the intents of the ag goals and policies. We've attached a list of explicit findings that we're requesting, and I hope you'll take a look at those. So what does secondary and incidental mean, and are they 2 distinct and different things? Everything in our ag goals and policies and in the definitions of an accessory use indicate that they're 2 different things and both are required. A visitor serving use is an accessory use, either accessory to agriculture or accessory to a residential use. When it's accessory to agriculture in ag zone lands, Ag Policy 6 guides us. When accessory to a residence, the Home Occupation Code governs. The definition of an accessory use and Section 2230-030 require the use to be customarily a part of, incidental, related to, and subordinate to the main, in this case, agricultural use. Ag Policy 6 was intended to encourage limited ag direct marketing and agricultural education. The ability to do more than the Home Occupation Codes allows is a recognition of the importance of those 2 things. Ag Goals 2 and 3 and Ag Policy 6 call upon us to protect the long-term viability of ag land. The greatest threat to the long-term viability of ag land is increasing its costs based on speculative value that flows from allowing non-ag commercial uses on ag land. A plain reading of the accessory use provision together with Ag Policy 6 indicates secondary and incidental are 2 separate requirements. Secondary means smaller than, and incidental means related to. This is consistent with the Home Occupations Codes and our ag goals and policies. It may be that you choose to change this in the future, but that's the interpretation we ask from you today. We ask that we've summarized specific findings we request in an attachment to our letter, but we're going to distribute an extra copy for your convenience with the referenced code sections. We ask that you interpret the existing policies and ordinances to protect ag land for agriculture and require the revisions to those policies and ordinance be made through the public process. Thank you.